Amen. GC 306, paragraph 1. "25 years later appeared the next sign mentioned in the prophecy, the darkening of the sun and the moon. What rendered this more striking was the fact that the time of its fulfillment had been definitely pointed out. In the Saviour's conversation with his disciples upon Olivet, after describing the long period of trial for the church in 1260 years of papal persecution, concerning which he had promised that the tribulation should be shortened, he thus mentioned certain events to precede his coming, and fixed the time when the first of these should be witnessed. In those days, after that tribulation, the sun shall be darkened and the moon shall not give her light." Mark 13:24. 1260 days or years terminated in 1798. Quarter of a century earlier, persecution had almost wholly ceased. Following this persecution, according to the words of Christ, the sun was to be darkened. On the 19th of May, 1780, this prophecy was fulfilled. So we discussed this at some length this morning, and this passage highlights, let's just read that bit again. What rendered this, second sentence, what rendered this more striking was the fact that the time of its fulfillment had been definitely pointed out. And the time of fulfillment of what?
The sign.
Which one?
It says 25 years later appeared the next sign.
Which was? It says it in the, if you read in the first sentence, it says it straight there.
Oh, the darkening for the sun and moon. I'm
Okay.
trying to remember what order they were.
Okay, they happen on the same day. So this has been definitely pointed out, and it's connected to what? When it says what rendered this more striking was the fact that the time of its fulfillment had been definitely pointed out. So the time of the darkening of the sun and the moon has been definitely pointed out, and that's what makes the prophecy more striking, or as striking as it was. And how was it definitely pointed out? James?
Going back several paragraphs, it points out from Luke 21:25, the sun shall be darkened and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in the heaven shall be shaken, dealing with the second advent, second coming.
Where are we?
306.1.
It says in that sentence, the first sentence that you read, appeared the next sign mentioned in the prophecy.
Okay, so 25 years later appeared the next sign mentioned in the prophecy, which is?
From Luke 21:25.
Which is the sun and the moon. So you want to take us back to 21:25, which is 304.1. Jesus said, "There shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars." So when it says 25 years later, coming back, appeared the next sign mentioned in the prophecy, she's combining two prophecies there, isn't she not? Yeah? Because it's not the next sign, it's the first sign.
Right.
And what rendered the fulfillment of this prophecy so striking? It says, was the fact that the time of its fulfillment had been definitely pointed out. So what's been definitely pointed out with respect to the fulfillment of the sun and the moon? Or are you reading it differently?
In the same paragraph that mentions Luke 21:25, she also points out Revelation 6:12, which shows there's a great earthquake and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair and the moon became as blood.
Okay.
So that shows that the earthquake would come first,
Yep.
and the second one would be the sun and the moon.
Okay. Brother Bob?
I don't know what direction you're going with this, but
I'm
I
just
see
trying to read that. I'm not going in any direction. I just want to read what the
what was so
paragraph is saying.
strikingly fulfilled, though, is, I mean, we're all talking about the tokens, but what was fulfilled, the prophecy was that persecution almost wholly ceased. That's what I'm seeing.
Okay, so what rendered this prophecy, the sun and the moon, more striking was that the time of its fulfillment had been definitely pointed out. And then she's going to explain what the definite time was. In the Saviour's conversation with his disciples upon Olivet, after describing the long period of trial for the church, the 1260 years, concerning which he had promised that the tribulation should be shortened, he thus mentioned certain events to precede his coming, and fixed a time when the first of these shall be witnessed. In those days after tribulation, the sun shall be darkened and the moon shall not give a light. 1260 years, days or years, terminating in 1798. Quarter of a century earlier, persecution had almost wholly ceased. Following this persecution, according to the words of Christ, the sun was to be darkened. So does everybody pick up what Brother Bob said? The reason why it's so striking is because it's given in connection to the ceasing of the tribulation. Yeah? It's not my purpose in this class to make application, but I'm hoping that you see the way these things are being laid out, just the fact that we know there's number 25 there, that the persecution is ceasing, it's right pickings for making applications if we were minded to do that. I'm not saying it would be easy, but the reason why we want to read these things carefully is because whatever the sun and the moon darkening means in our history, it's going to have a striking fulfillment because persecution will have ceased before that. And if the persecution has ceased before that, we should be predicting the ceasing of the persecution, and then once that has ceased, we know 25, whatever that means, 25 something later, if it's years, I don't know what it means, but the number 25 later, when the sun and the moon are affected, whatever that means, it would be a striking fulfillment. And the reason that makes it more striking, not the fact that it happens, but it's connected to the ceasing of persecution. Did everybody follow that logic without even understanding what the application would be? Okay, so as I say, I'm not attempting to make any applications, but unless we read the original carefully, we're not going to be able to point out these things and make an application in the first place. Was that okay, Brother James? Mm-hmm. Yep. Everybody okay with how we've approached that paragraph? Yep. Next paragraph. That's just going to be talking more about the dark day, 1780. So is the next paragraph. So is the next paragraph. So there's fear and anxiety, awe, gradually filled the minds. Women stood at the door looking upon the dark landscape. Men turned from their labour in the fields. All of these things are happening, and what makes this much more striking is the fact, as she says, the persecution had ceased before, and Christ clearly points that out. So we should understand what that means. 1773. What have we said about 1773? This dissolution of the Jesuit order, which is being forced upon the Catholic Church, they're not doing voluntarily, by the governments of Europe, because they've just had enough of the abuse that the Jesuits have placed upon them. Anything else? Bob?
On a little bit different angle, not looking directly at the papacy, but looking at the Reformation, that has already been going on for several centuries. As the Reformation continued and the persecution ceased, you see it, when you look at the landscape of history, you see the rise of the United States very clearly, and the transition going from the European nations to the United States. I mean, if you want to start looking at history and seeing how that ties in with the persecution ceasing, I think it also fits.
So as we wait for you to finish.
Yes,
Yeah.
done.
Sister Tess, 1773.
Yeah.
Anything happening in 1773 in the United States?
Boston Tea Party.
Boston Tea Party. They're all-
Boston Tea Party.
All familiar with the Boston Tea Party and its significance? Maybe we're not aware of its significance in the line of prophecy, but we're all familiar with the throwing of obviously the tea over the ships. You can go into the number of tea boxes, the number of ships, the fact that they dress up as Indians, where those tribes are located. There's a lot of symbology in that whole story. That the fact that they dress up and they pretend to be someone else, sort of like a common enemy, if you like. And these are the American government, American officials, however you want to look at that, who are doing this work. That's happening in 1773.
The start of the American Revolution also, I guess that's part of it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
If we were going to go to a Bible passage, not that deals directly with this, but is going to start introducing the United States in relationship to this history, where would we go? Where would you go? I'm sure there's not one correct answer. Brother Larry?
I would go to Revelation 13.
We go to Revelation 13.
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
Brother Bob, you're saying yes?
Yeah.
Anyone else?
With great controversy 440.
Bible, I'm thinking Bible.
Oh, it's about Revelation 13.
Okay.
In 1788.
What about 12?
I would have gone to Revelation 12. Not Revelation 13. Everybody okay with Revelation 12?
12, 16.
Why would you go to 12, Sister Alyssa?
Because it talks about the woman in the wilderness, the earth providing protection, and also the 1260 is mentioned.
So Revelation 12:16. Someone I heard someone say that. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. Everybody okay with that? If we go back one verse, and the serpent cast out of his mouth water as the flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. So, whose issue in the flood? Sorry?
The serpent?
Verse 16.
Who's issuing the flood?
It's whose mouth is it coming out of?
Dragon.
Serpent.
Sorry?
Serpent.
Which one you want to go for?
Well, in 15 it just says, and the serpent cast out of his mouth waters of the flood.
And 16?
Dragon.
And it just says it swallowed up the dragon. Yeah, so.
Sorry?
Yeah, it says the dragon, so, oh yeah, okay.
So verse 15 says the serpent,
Yeah,
and verse 16 says the dragon.
they're different.
What do you think?
I don't know. Seems like they're the same.
Why use different symbols if they're the same?
Yeah, it's the same.
Anyone have any thoughts? Bob?
Maybe the serpent maybe referring directly to Satan's control, and the dragon could be referencing, you know, the earthly powers that he is manipulating to cause the flood.
Brother Graham?
I think it's two different meanings, so that's why. Similar to what Brother Bob just mentioned.
Satan and earthly kingdoms?
I think one could be doctrine and the other could be state power.
So serpent is doctrine and dragon is state power. Any further? Why did you say doctrine? Who issues doctrine?
Sure.
What is the doctrine? When you, in the symbology, what would the doctrine be?
Would be the flood.
Okay, so you went from the dragon in verse 16 to the flood in verse 15. But the equivalent of the dragon in 15 would be the serpent. So if we go serpent, dragon, you're saying the dragon is state power, the serpent is?
Well, the way I said it would be church power.
So church. So the flood of 15, you said was doctrine. And so the flood of 16.
Would also be.
The state doesn't have doctrine, does it?
No.
So what would the flood be?
Persecution.
Sorry?
I was thinking persecution.
So that would be persecution. So that would tie in with what Brother Bob was saying, that the United States is going to be the relief for God's people to help them escape from persecution. The people who persecute are the governments of Europe. Sister Alyssa?
Testimonies to Ministers 38.2 connects both the,
Speak up.
sorry,
Testimonies to Ministers, page 38.2.
it connects the serpent
Oh,
and,
before we connect it, let's
Yeah.
go just with the Bible passages. I know you don't like doing that.
you said to just go with, I didn't hear what you said.
You heard various people commenting
Right.
on verse 15 and 16.
Yeah.
You brought us to chapter 12, verse 16. Do you have any comment to add to what they said or not?
The
You agree, you disagree?
I disagree, but I agree. The only thing that I didn't hear, and maybe it was said and I just didn't hear it, was the papacy.
So no said that someone said church.
Okay. The dragon gave his seat and authority to the to the serpent. Maybe I have that wrong, but that's just in my mind of creating the justification for the two describing the papacy as the woman who is riding the beast that's being pointed.
So when did the dragon give his seat? Because you said 1260
Yeah.
when you introduced us to 12, chapter 12.
Right.
It's long before 1260. So you can't use Revelation 13 verse 2 to fix the dragon here.
Well, the dragon goes back to Satan originally, that old serpent. So I don't know where to go from there.
Okay, TM 38.2 is a good place to go.
Okay.
Kings, rulers and governors
Yeah.
have taken upon themselves the brand of Antichrist. and they're represented as kings, rulers, and governors. So we can mark them as kings, rulers, and governors in this history, but it's not Revelation 13:2. That's the history that precedes this.
Okay. But the 1260, so I know that points to 1798, and the opening of the earth points to the United States.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to draw anything out. Brother Larry?
Revelation 12:9 reads this. And the great dragon was cast out.
I'll read it if you don't,
okay.
just for the mic. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world, and he was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him.
Well, I'm saying that's calling the serpent and the dragon the same symbol. I don't know if that reflects anything later or verses 6, 15, and 16.
So you disagree with Brother Graham that it's church state?
Well, no, I would say that the dragon typifies pagan Rome, or papal Rome too, you know, can transition. So in one sense, at least 9 is showing me that, but I couldn't answer it for verse 15 and 16.
So 9 is showing you that they're the same entity.
It could be, yeah.
The great dragon was cast out, that old serpent. Yes, it's the same entity, the devil.
Uh-huh.
But in 15 and 16,
It's separated.
are you going to keep them separate, or are you going to just say it's a repeat and enlarge, the same thing?
No, I think they'd have to be separate. One state power, one would be, just at first glance,
State power and the other?
the Satan.
Not church.
Oh, yeah, church and state, excuse me.
Okay.
Churchcraft.
Yeah.
Brother Theodore.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time understanding why you think they're different. In 15 and 16, it's the same, it's doing the same thing. Because the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after a woman. And then it says, later on in 16, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of its mouth. As far as I see, it's the same thing. It's just giving more detail. It's not showing a different power.
Why not just keep it a serpent or as dragon? Why switch?
Well, because they're telling us that this is a dragon power. So this is a beast that's going to be dealt with in different forms. But behind it is Satan. So Satan is the one always behind this power. It's a satanic power. But the serpent, it's tying us back to Genesis chapter 3.
So,
There's a whole bunch of things that tie us back to Genesis
so
chapter
the serpent
3.
is what in 15?
Well, the serpent is Satan. And the
And
dragon
is,
Satan's power on this earth.
but in 15 it's not Satan's power on the earth. It's just Satan.
No, it's still Satan's power, but they're interchangeable terms.
Okay, so in 15 it's Satan's power on earth, and in 16 it's Satan's power on earth.
Yeah, but it's focusing more upon the fact that Satan is the one behind that power. That's all.
In which verse?
Anytime it mentions the serpent, it's referring back to Satan. The dragon isn't necessarily Satan.
So you're going back to
The serpent
what
is
Brother
Satan.
Bob was saying initially, that 15 is Satan or Satan's agents on the earth. Just want to clarify, I'm understanding what you're
Well,
saying.
this is all Satan. Satan's behind the whole thing. The dragon is this beast that has 7 heads and 10 horns, and it's the great red dragon.
Okay.
Right. So it's pagan Rome.
So
Well, this is Satan, right?
Yeah, but
But it's
sorry.
So, I just want to clarify, 16 is pagan Rome. But 15 is not pagan Rome. 15 is Satan.
because so there's this: the serpent cast them out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he caused her might be carried away. Yeah, so at this point, I kind of see the question you're asking, because we have at the beginning, we have pagan Rome, right? This is the one that persecutes Christ when he's born, right? And then we have this 1260 years, the woman flees into the wilderness. And the dragon, which is pagan Rome, it seeks to continue persecuting the woman, but it has to do it in a different form, right? Because it's not pagan Rome persecuting the woman.
Who is it
12
in verse 16?
It'd have to be papal Rome.
So that dragon in verse 16 is the papacy.
Yes, it would have to be the papacy.
Okay, so in verse 15, what's that serpent?
It'd still have to be the papacy in this case.
So you've got papacy and papacy.
Yeah.
And why would it be using two different symbols for the papacy?
Why is John using two different symbols?
Gods. I
Okay.
don't wanna say,
Well, because the one symbol brings us back to Genesis chapter 3.
And the other?
It deals with these beasts from Daniel. It's going to tie to these political powers, because Satan isn't necessarily a political power back in Genesis chapter 3. He doesn't have control of the nations. So there's governments that are exercising this power through this history, not just Satan personally.
So now you've just shifted that 16 is state, not church. It sounded like that's what you had just done.
Well, it's always the state, even with the church. The state is still doing the persecuting. The church gives there's the state has to support the church in order for it to have persecution.
We all agree on that. I just want to know what those symbols are targeting. In 16, is it targeting the papal church, or is it targeting the countries that the papal church is controlling? Because you said it was the papal church.
So we have people going to the United States. Is that what we're talking about?
No, no,
Or
no.
are we talking
The
about
dragon. You said the dragon was the papacy
Mhm.
in 16. But then you said the dragon was actually the countries that the papacy was controlling.
Yeah, I don't really make a distinction between it in the sense that the papacy still needs these political powers to do the persecuting. The church doesn't really persecute without any, it doesn't have the power to persecute on its own without the state giving it that power.
Brother Daniel.
If you look there to the chart, in Daniel 7, the same beast of...
Here?
No, yeah, down there. I think it's Daniel 8.
This
Yeah,
one?
yeah.
Or this one?
Both. So
Okay.
it's the same beast.
Mhm.
So I think it's the same earthly government that persecutes, but when it deals with papal Rome, you have the papacy. But it's the same kings of the earth. It's Europe, the kings of Europe that are persecuting the Christians. So the beast is the same, but now you have the papacy in place. Here we see the same thing. We know that the red dragon is pagan Rome, and that's the kings of Europe. But then says that pagan Rome, the red dragon, he's the one that is in the 1260. How it can be? The only option for me that I see is that is the same earthly kings that are persecuting, but address also the papacy with it.
Mhm.
And before they didn't have it. So you have the same characteristics there. You have the same beast, but now have the papacy. And here you have the red dragon, and then you have the serpent, the 1260.
Okay, so what are you saying the dragon is?
The king's
State power.
state power.
And the serpent?
The serpent should be I think the spirit of persecution, so I don't know, maybe the papacy.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you agree
I
with
think-
what Brother Graham
Yeah,
said?
I think that's it. That's what I think, I'm not sure.
Anyone else? So let's read TM 38.2. We'll just put that in the record.
The accompanying, I think it's GC 438. Goes along with it.
I'll cut into the passage.
Can you
38.
repeat?
TM 38.2. We'll just read this and I'll give you an opportunity to speak. I'll cut halfway, two-thirds into the paragraph. Kings and rulers and governors have placed upon themselves the brand of Antichrist and are represented as the dragon who goes to make war with the saints, with those who keep the commandments of God and who have the faith of Jesus. She's quoting Revelation 12 there. In their enmity against the people of God, they showed themselves guilty also of the choice of Barabbas instead of Christ. So she's identifying in 16 that this dragon power is state power. So then if we're okay with that straight definition, which would still leave us to decide what the serpent power would be. So Theodore?
So in Great Controversy 438, where Ellen White talks about, while the dragon primarily represents Satan, it is in a secondary sense a symbol of pagan Rome. So she's talking about Revelation 12 verse 9. So that's where I get my idea from, that it is pagan Rome, but it's primarily Satan. But then she says later, where's it here?
Before we go later,
Yeah.
let's just tackle this. Everybody knows it's Satan,
Yeah.
but when we read those passages, we wouldn't read Satan in that, would we?
Well, it tells us in the Bible, it says it's the old serpent, the devil, and Satan. So I would
Yeah,
read
of course,
Satan into
but
it.
we're not going to go into Revelation 13:2 and say that beast that came out of the sea received its seat from Satan.
No,
You're not going to do that.
no, because we know that Satan uses earthly powers to exercise his power.
But it says it received it from the dragon,
Right.
and we know who the dragon is.
Well, the dragon
It's
is
state power.
right. Primarily represents Satan, but in a secondary sense, a symbol of pagan Rome.
So
So
which
it's-
one do we want to go with, the primary or the secondary application?
I think we're using the secondary application most of the time because that's what we see.
Because
but-
if we didn't, the passages wouldn't mean anything.
Right. We need to see that this is nations doing this. But so when it's talking about it, my point is when it talks about it being the serpent or the dragon, it's not saying that this is some different power. The serpent is some different power from the dragon,
But
in my view.
But you agree that 16, the dragon, is not the papal church.
Yes, because what ends up happening is pagan Rome gives its seat to the papacy, its power, its seat, and great authority. It gives that to the papacy. So the papacy then still has that power and that seat that came from pagan Rome. So it's not, in a sense, its own, it's not some new power. The papacy is not really some new power.
Not arguing that point.
Yeah.
16 is state power, because it's the dragon. We had two SOP quotes that prove that.
Yeah,
So when we come to verse 15,
yeah.
what is verse 15 dealing with? Is it dealing with those same state powers, or is it dealing with the papal church?
So when it says the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, people are arguing that this is referring to the church seeking to persecute the woman, not the state power. Yeah. I don't know why we need to do that.
Because the theme of the 1260 is a church-state relationship and the threefold union. That's why people see that in there.
Yeah, but we see that in chapter 13 really clearly,
And 17
and 17
even
as well.
clearer.
Yeah.
Because all those three chapters are all dealing with the church-state relationship
Mhm.
in its various forms or phases.
Mhm.
That's why they see it there.
Okay. I'm just not sure why the word serpent would then refer to the papacy and not, because it is the dragon, is the serpent. Right? So I guess maybe there can be a distinction. I just never have seen it.
Okay. Brother James?
My only question is now that we've sat here and dissected this for a minute,
Speak up.
now that we've sat here and dissected this for a minute, Revelation 12:14 says, and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. So during the 1260, she was persecuted. So in what way was she nourished from the face of the serpent?
The test?
I'm just wondering, when we take Satan as a symbol, isn't he the ultimate church-state relationship, or the counterfeit of that? If God is a priest and a king, then that's a church-state. Satan wants to be king of the earth and also God on earth, so he's a church-state. But when you use him as a symbol, you can split that. Both can be Satan, but they can be split. One's a church, one's a state. Both symbols of Satan, but 2 separate entities.
So is that making the defense in verse 9 why he's identified as a serpent and a dragon?
If you bring them together to be Satan, then yes, they're the same thing. But he also has 2 characteristics, so they're split.
So is that yes to my question?
I think so.
So Satan is identified as a dragon and a serpent
Yeah.
because he fulfills these 2 roles, a priest king,
Church and state,
church and state.
separate in application.
And all we haven't done, because perhaps it's not that easy, because we don't have just a straight Spirit Prophecy quote that says serpent equals church.
Correct, that's what I was wondering, yeah.
Just like we have with dragon equals state. There's not just a clear passage. It takes perhaps some working out to do that.
Has it been done? Like, has it been solidified, or?
There's not an SOP quote for that. You can work through some logic to show that, but a challenge to someone if they've got some spare time. Anybody want to tackle Brother James' question, verse 14? And to the woman was given she's basically able to go to the wilderness where she is protected from the serpent for 1260 years.
And she's nourished with the Word of God. So God's Word is still there in the wilderness.
So I guess I'm not 100% sure what your question is. How do we work out the dichotomy between not being nourished and being persecuted?
Well, in verse 13, it says that the dragon was cast through the earth and he persecuted the woman. And we know that the church was persecuted for 1260 years. In the following verse, it says she was sent into the wilderness and protected from the face of the serpent. So the dragon is persecuting, and the serpent she's protected from. So I'm asking how is that?
I have no idea. Yes, someone has.
Because if we can answer that, then we might have a better idea of what the serpent is, instead of just saying, that it's Satan at the base level.
So you don't like the argument that Sister Tess has brought forth?
No, I agree with what she's saying. I've just, from these verses, I don't know how you can agree with it or disagree with it.
That the serpent is Satan.
Right.
But Satan is identified as 2 elements. So one of those elements couldn't just be Satan. Both elements combined have to be Satan. And if we have one of them, which is a state, I don't know if you want to go with deduction or just logic, that the other one would have to be church. Particularly because chapters 12, 13 and 17 all deal with the church-state relationship.
Right, so looking at it that way with what Sister Tess said, was it obviously wasn't protected from persecution from the dragon because it was persecuted, although it was cut short. But as a serpent, it was protected from the serpent. Is that because it was allowed to maintain a semi-pure doctrine? And if that's the case, then what aspect? It would have to be the church that was kept from completely mixing the doctrine.
So, if we just follow on with that thought, if you go to Revelation chapter 2, so it's going to be persecuted by it's going to be persecuted by the dragon. Why? Why is this dragon? Why does the dragon have the ability to do this, Brother Gregory?
Could you ask that question again?
We're in the 1260. Why does the dragon have power? Why does it have ability to come and cause pain to this woman?
I see. Because God allowed it as a response of Pergamos, the compromises.
So you're saying it's punishment?
In a sense, yeah.
So
And I suppose indirectly to also provide an opportunity to clean up the church. Would that also, because that tends to happen with persecution.
okay, so on one level we've got the first four churches, and you're saying, you didn't say explicitly, but I assume you're talking about Pergamos' compromise.
Yeah.
They begin to compromise with the church, with the state, with Rome.
Yeah.
And where do we see that compromise, Sister Bronwyn? In Pergamos. What's the epitome of that compromise?
The doctrine. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Brother Nathan? What history do we see in Pergamos that's the epitome of compromise?
I'm not thinking decree of Justinian, maybe?
What years approximately is Pergamos?
It's 330 to 538.
Okay, sorry?
330 to 538. Thyatira is 538 to 1798, right?
So you'd go with Justinian? 533? Anyone else? Anyone want to venture? Brother Greg?
Constantine.
We normally go to Constantine to see the compromise, where this pagan king flips and becomes essentially Christian, but it's all fake. It's not real. So there's this compromise, and so they're going to be punished. So we've got this theme that the 1260 is punishment because of their compromise. But what else is that 1260 with respect to this punishment? 1260 is the second half of 2520. The 2520 is punishment all the way along, beginning with pagan and then going into papal. Punishment because of the broken covenant that God's people have, got into but not got out of. They broke the covenant, so they're going to be punished. So it's a theme of punishment. So there's this theme of punishment that's running through this story, and God's going to shield them in some shape or form. And we saw that 1773 as an example of that, a symbol of that. If we go to Revelation 2, verse 18. And unto the angel of the church in Thyatira write, these things saith the Son of God, who hath his eyes like unto a flame of fire, and his feet are like fine brass. Brother Larry, the angel of the church, who is that? What is that? This angel of the church of Thyatira. Daniel?
I don't know, I can guess.
Guess.
Yeah.
It's the fourth church, so it's the fourth angel. I don't know.
Yeah, I was what angel equals
Oh, what angel
Messenger.
it was?
in this context.
It's talking about the 1260. I don't understand.
Messenger.
Fourth church is Thyatira.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing. I could go to any of the churches. I could go to Smyrna and unto the angel of the church of Smyrna. It's the same
Okay.
thing. I just want to know what that angel is.
It's the angel of the church.
Okay, so just give me angel equals.
Oh, the person who gives the message. I don't know.
Okay,
It's a messenger.
okay, so that's a classic definition. If you go to the Greek, it's going to give you messenger. Is this the test?
So leadership.
This is the leadership. This is the leadership of the church. He's addressing the leaders. And you'll see as you run, particularly in this one, you can see it really clearly. I know thy works and charity and service and faith and thy patience and thy works, and the last to be more than the first. Notwithstanding, I have a few things against thee, because thou sufferest that woman Jezebel, which calleth herself a prophetess, to teach and seduce my servants to commit fornication and to eat things sacrificed unto idols. So we'll stop at verse 20. So Brother James, what's happening here? So I'll start you off. The angel of Thyatira is verse 20.
Is allowing doctrine to be mixed, false doctrine to be mixed with pure doctrine.
Everybody okay with that? It says two things. He's allowing Jezebel to do two things. What are the two things? Brother Nathan?
It says to teach and seduce my servants.
To teach and seduce my servants. Who are the servants?
Those in the church, probably the leadership.
The church. It's God's people in that history. And the angel is allowing Jezebel to teach God's people and to seduce God's people. And who is Jezebel? Papal church. We could show that if we would, because you go back to the story of Elijah. So the church of Thyatira, the leadership of the church, are allowing the papacy to teach false doctrines to God's people and to seduce them. And in the midst of all of that, God is in some shape or form protecting them so that they can come out and survive, I guess, that experience, which is separate and distinct from the persecution which they deserved, which is the dragon power, that persecution. So that's how I would see verse 14. Verse 14, whatever that wilderness means, whatever those wings are symbolizing, there's some form of protection that the church is receiving as its own leaders are allowing the papal flood to come in and sweep the people away. So all of that happened. So our past discussion, all Brother Bob's fault, because he wanted to bring in the United States here in 1773. So it's an important part of prophecy. And Ellen White doesn't really talk about it. You'll see how she spoke about the persecution ceasing. This is European persecution. She doesn't mention the Jesuits, but that's what's causing that. This backlash from the States. They've had enough of this of the Jesuits. And what was the purpose or the role of the papacy? Sister Sue Ellen. in the 1260, what's the papacy's job title, not job description?
The defender of faith.
The defender of the faith. Whose faith?
Catholic Church.
They are the Catholic Church. Not the Jesuits. I'm asking about the papal system, papal church, papacy. What's their job description? What's their role in the 1260?
Well, weren't they trying to see who is a heretic and who is following their faith?
Okay, they're trying to see who's a heretic and who's not following their faith. Brother Larry.
Persecute.
Persecute. So their job in life is to persecute.
Those who believe the Bible and stand against what they believe, goes against.
Brother Gregory, who does the papacy work for?
Essentially for Satan at the end of the day.
For Satan.
They don't work for the state if they're in power.
Okay, so I'm okay with Satan. Brother Graham, who's the papacy work for in the 1260?
God. Oh, okay.
Because he's saying God, you're saying
It
Satan.
depends in what manner. because
Okay.
It's both. Yeah, because I've already answered that kind before. Yeah.
So, the papal church is working for God. How do you show that? What's the argument? Sister Bronwyn, what's the argument that the papal church is working for God?
Because he uses nations as in a rod. He uses
To do what?
to punish his people.
So he's going to use the nations as a rod or a staff in his hand to beat his people. So the papacy is doing its role really well for all of this 1235, is it? 1235 years? Got that math right? So it's doing its job for 1235 years. And then it says what? What does it say? Sorry? Someone says something? Stop, we'll take a break. So now it becomes disobedient. He says we're no longer going to do what God tells us to do. So God hasn't finished his punishment of the people yet, has he? Of his own people. Because he needs to punish them for 1260 years, doesn't he? Otherwise we're going to be 25 years short of 2520. It'd be 2495. Is that right? It'd be 2490. So I've got 2520. So it'd be 24. So God would fail in his mission, wouldn't he? So what's God going to have to do? When the papacy says, we're taking a break, we're going on strike, we're not going to do our role. What does he have to do? He has to use someone else. Which Bible chapter or where are we going to go for that? Okay, tell me who he's going to use. He's going to use Islam. No, he doesn't use Islam. Islam is there. Brother Daniel. France. He's going to use France. Sister Bronwyn, where do we go for that?
Revelation. I don't know where to go.
13.
So we go to Revelation 11. So we're in Revelation 11 and God's going to say we have to carry on punishing the people because we have to give them their full measure, because the 2520 is what kind of a punishment? 7 times, and 7 is? Sorry?
Severity.
Severity? Complete. And complete is another way of saying perfect. He has to give a perfect punishment to them because he gave an oath. What's the oath? Number 7. So he's given the oath, so it can't be 25 years short. So the papacy's taken a holiday. So he says, okay, if you're not going to do the job, we have to get someone else to do the job. And who's he going to get to do that job? It's going to be France. What's the problem with using France?
It's localized.
Sorry?
It's localized.
Atheistic.
What's the problem with France? Because they're not atheistic.
Oh, right.
What's the problem with France? Where is France?
They're Christian.
Sorry?
They're Christian.
They're Christian, that's the problem. France is over here.
Oh, right.
So France is over here. So to use France, he has to get them and turn them upside down and change them into something. So he's going to change them from what into what? Let's give it a title. What's he going to change them into? What's he going to change them into?
King of the South.
He's going to change them into the King of the South. We okay with that?
Yeah.
Bible verse. Brother Stephen, the Bible verse. It's going to change France into the King of the South.
I don't know.
Sister Alyssa.
Daniel 11 is what comes to mind.
Verse?
That's right. 31.
Brother Graham, verse? Verse 40. Daniel 11, verse 40. The King of the South and the King of the North are going to have a fight. So, here's the King of the South. So he's going to change it into the King of the South, because what was it before? It was the King of the North before. So when the papacy says, I'm not going to work for you any longer, work for God, God's going to say, okay, we'll get someone else to work for me. And who are we going to select? So he's going to take France, change France from the King of the North to the King of the South, and get France to finish off the work. And if you read Ellen White's commentary on Revelation 11, I guess one of the more pertinent verses, if I can find it, verse 7. And verse 3, they've been working for 1260 years. We okay with that?
Yep.
Verse 7, yeah? 11:3. Will give power unto my 2 witnesses. 11:3. And they're going to be working for 1,203 score days, 1260. Everybody okay with that? And then verse 7, and when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. So Ellen White, it's not even a marginal reading here to change that. But when Ellen White's going to comment on that, not in every reference, because in some references she keeps the verse as is, but in the pertinent one from the Great Controversy, she changes one of those words. We all know what that is? Yeah, she swaps the word finished to finishing, because she wants to identify what? That this beast that rises out of the bottomless pit does not arise when? Sorry? So it doesn't arise in 1798 at the end of the 1260. As they're finishing, as they're coming to their end, which is this 25 years, then the power from the bottomless pit is going to ascend. The power is going to ascend out of the bottomless pit. It's going to come up out of that bottomless pit. And it's marking France here. And the persecution of God's people in the French Revolution is the tail end of the 2520. Are we okay with that? That perspective.
Can you say it again? The last part about the word that changed?
Someone got the reference to that? We'll read. We'll read.
Revelation 11:7. Is that what you
Yeah,
mean?
but there's spirit
Yes,
prophecy.
the Spirit prophecy quote. I mean,
Oh.
yeah. It's Revelation 11:7.
Should say 268, roughly. 268, 269. 268.3. GC. 268.3.
Okay. GC 268, paragraph 3. This is chapter 15, the Bible in the French Revolution. When they shall have finished, in parenthesis, are finishing their testimony, the period when the two witnesses were to prophesy clothed in sackcloth ended in 1798. So if we were to read the verse as is, verse 7, it would mean that the beast would rise up out of the bottomless pit at 1798 when they have finished their testimony. That's what you'd be forced to conclude. So she's going to adjust that and say, are finishing their testimony. So as they're finishing their testimony, that's when it arises out of the bottomless pit. Next sentence. As they were approaching the termination of their work in obscurity, war was to be made upon them by the power represented as the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit. In many of the nations of Europe, the powers that ruled in church and state had for centuries been controlled by Satan through the medium of the papacy, but here is brought to view a new manifestation of satanic power. So, who's doing all the work? The states, the governments are doing that. It says that the European powers, it's the governments. So who was controlling the governments before? In this history? Papal church, church-state relationship. And who's controlling them now?
Say France.
France is the one is doing the work. Who's controlling France? So we could say Satan, or we could say atheism, or we could say spiritualism, whatever symbol we're going to use. I'd prefer not to use Satan because Satan's at the back of everything. So if we went for atheism, which is essentially spiritualism, you see that the driving force, whether it's religion or no religion, always produces the same thing when you've got this 1260. So even though she's going to mark the ceasing of persecution, it really doesn't cease. It goes right to the end. But Ellen White wants to mark a specific, or make a specific point, but we can make other points as well, which are not contradictory but complementary.
So it is accurate to suggest then that Satan and God are behind them for different purposes. It's almost like there's a different motive there. God has a motive of a real righteous motive, really, for his use of atheism in the French Revolution, whereas Satan is nefarious, like you'd expect.
Yes. So when I said, who does he work for, and you said Satan, that cannot be an incorrect answer. It has to be a correct answer. The papacy's boss is Satan. We know that because that's what Revelation 12 says. Satan is the serpent, is the dragon. We know that. And we know that God and Satan don't work together. But what we want to give is what at least I wanted to show us was a perspective how we can integrate not just the 25-20. It wasn't a push to promote the 25-20. It's just it happens to be here and it is correct. But we know that God is behind this punishment.
It's a little bit like Islam.
Yes.
In that sense.
Yeah. And we can go back to the Old Testament stories. It's not something that we make up. Babylon is going to be used to punish God's people. There are clear passages that teach that. It's just the modern day fulfillment of that. So at one level, yes, the persecution ceases, but at another level it doesn't. I've said the reason why the papacy is going to receive a deadly wound here. Actually, we didn't even quite get there. It receives a deadly wound here. Why? Who's going to give the deadly wound? Who's behind that? God is behind it, not Satan. So God's going to punish the papacy. And according to this story, why would he punish the papacy?
Because they didn't finish the job.
Because they were derelict in their duty, they didn't finish the job. But that's not the normal answer that we would give of why they would receive a deadly wound. What's the normal answer that we give?
Because they persecuted innocent people as well, like they were unjust.
No, they don't care. God says just wipe everyone out. If you go back to Isaiah, to the stick model that Sister Bronwyn had, what does it say in that passage about the stick and the saw?
Oh, kill more men, women and children? No?
Let's have a look. So we're in Isaiah chapter 10, and I'll read verse 15. Normally I'd get you to read it. We finish at 5? Is that right? So, okay. So I'll read verse 15. Shall the axe boast itself against him that heweth therewith, or shall the saw magnify itself against him that shaketh it? As if the rod should shake itself against them that lift it up, or as if the staff should lift up itself as if it were no wood. So, what's the normal story or response of why they're going to receive the deadly wound? Brother Graham?
Become proud.
They become proud. Sister Alyssa?
Oh, yeah.
They become boastful. Which verse?
I was thinking of the Assyrian king, and I can't remember where that's coming from. That you had us reading from.
Okay, so if we just drop back to verse 13. For he saith, by the strength of my hand have I done it, and by my wisdom, for I am prudent, and I have removed the bounds of the people, and have robbed their treasures, and I have put down the inhabitants like a valiant man. So it's because of these boastful statements that the king of the north, whether you're going to make it the Assyrians or the Babylonians, is making, that's why they're going to be punished. Sister Bronwyn, you looking fine?
I agree.
Sister Alyssa?
I just realized that this was the passage that you had us read.
Okay. Everyone okay? So, we're looking at the heralds of the morning. It's standard of we're just reading the Great Controversy. We're not doing anything special or unique. Not even really making any application. But I just want us to read the passages carefully and maybe think about these events, these waymarks, in a slightly different way. The normal way we would identify the reason for the deadly wound, maybe I assume that's why we would do it. Maybe I should have asked, why did it receive a deadly wound? What would your answer be? Maybe it's too late to ask the question now because it's why it receives a deadly wound. My understanding is normally we would argue that it's because it boasts itself. It's not just done its work, but it's said that the reason it had the ability to do its work was because of its own strength. If you like, it attributes its power to Satan. He says, I'm a satanic power, and Satan gave me all this power to wipe God's church out, and God's going to say, hold on a minute, without me allowing that to happen, you would have done nothing. Let me teach you a lesson. So that's the normal narrative.
Like Nebuchadnezzar.
Sorry?
Like Nebuchadnezzar.
It's like Nebuchadnezzar, exactly. Chapter 4. This is Babylon that I created in my own strength. But I also wanted us to see, just from that passage where she says, the dark day, what was more striking about it was the cessation of persecution. So she marks that as some, important event. But even that important event where we tied it back to the Jesuits, we can also tie it back to what's happening in the United States, the Boston Tea Party, over the issue of taxes. There's many things we could see there. But beyond those details, it was to show another story that the papal church that works for God is now not doing its work. And its work was to control the European kings, to make them do its bidding, which was to punish and hurt God's people. And the papal church said, I'm going to stop doing that, don't want to do it anymore. And so God says, okay, if you're not going to listen to me, I'm going to punish you as well. So that's the punishment there in 1798. But he's not going to let God's people off free for those 25 years. He's also going to continue the punishment, but he has to find a new person to do this. And the new person he's going to use is France. Problem with France is not someone new, someone that's been around for a long time, because France is here at the beginning. And I'm sure we're familiar with the story that it's France that puts the papacy on the throne, and it's France that takes the papacy off the throne. France here was one of these nations that basically said, we're not going to listen to the papacy anymore. And then God's going to turn them from a persecuting power that's driven by Catholicism into a persecuting power that's driven by atheism. So France just continues its work all the way through. It just changes religion at this juncture. And even if we don't understand what to do about that, I'm sure we can all see that there's some kind of application to be made here. France changes its religion. There's a change in persecution. Who's going to be persecuting? You could mark France all the way through, but France changes its religion. Its purpose for persecuting changes. And all this is in relationship to 1773 and 1798, and it's 25 years. Everyone okay with that? So let's come back to the great controversy. We're around 307 paragraph 1, but I'm going to drop down. We're not going to read any of that. She spends a lot of time, a number of paragraphs, in dealing with this dark day. Okay, so we're going to go to 308 paragraph 1. 308 paragraph 1. May 19th, 1780 stands in history as a dark day. Since the time of Moses, no period of darkness of equal density, extent and duration has ever been recorded. The description of this event, as given by eyewitnesses, is but an echo of the words of the Lord recorded by the prophet Joel 2,500 years previous to their fulfillment. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. Joel 2:23. So you've probably seen presentations now, or you may not have, that are going to use this paragraph and they're going to make application here in the book of Joel. And what people are going to do is take the year 1780, and she says 2,500 years previous to their fulfillment, 2,500 years, and we're going to get 1798 and go back 2,500 years, and we're going to get back to what date?
Or 1780?
1780, so 1780?
So you get 721.
Must be the plague.
You okay or not?
I just wanted to make sure I was hearing.
What did I say? Did I say it wrong? Did I say?
Yeah, you said 1798, not
Sorry.
1780.
1780. I wrote 1780. I meant 1780. So 1780. If you do 2,500 years back, so it would normally take you to 720. But obviously, we know that we have to factor in that there is no year zero when we go. So it takes us back to which year? Brother Theodore's already given us. It's going to take you back to 721. I'll put in the minus sign. It's not actually proper to do that. You just do BC. We can do BC. So it takes you back to 721. So why is that significant? Why is 721 significant? The captivity into Babylon?
It's the destruction of Samaria. We should all know the destruction of Samaria is in 721.
Some people need a bit more time to drag those things out of their memory banks because it's not in the... because we don't use that date very often. So all I want us to see, without going into the history in any detail, is that 721 is really close to 723. Everybody knows 723. So if we're at 723, we know that this is connected to the 2520. So just understanding this one paragraph, there's a number of things we can get from this paragraph, but this is just one point. That what we can now do is get the book of Joel and we can locate it reasonably accurately. Before you have this passage, you can reasonably put Joel in a certain time frame, but not accurately enough. So this allows you to see the relationship of the book of Joel in relation to the two tribes. If this is Hoshea, this is the 10 and the two tribes, and this is Zedekiah, and we've got Hezekiah here in the south, Hoshea in the north. And if we put 723 here, when you get that framework, and now you read the book of Joel, it then begins to allow you to understand clearly, or clearer at least, what's happening in the book of Joel. So here's 721. Two years after 723. Is everybody reasonably familiar with Joel? Especially Joel chapter 1 and 2. Yes? No? So I'll give a really basic overview of what's happening here. Maybe we should go to Joel. So we'll go to Joel 1, chapter 1, verse 2. Hear this, ye old men, and give ear, all the inhabitants of the land. Hath this been in your days, or even in the days of your fathers? Sister Tess, could you paraphrase that for us?
He's asking the elderly if they've ever seen this before or heard of it happening.
Okay, so he's asking the people, have they... You said what? Have they
seen this themselves or heard of it happening before?
Okay, so have you seen or heard this thing ever before? So what's the tense, past, present or future, of this conversation in relationship to what's being spoken about? Was it past, present, or future? Brother James? Sister Alyssa said past. Everybody okay with past? Sister Tess? Yeah? So he's asking a question to the people. He said, what has just happened, what you have just seen, has anything like this ever happened before? It's a rhetorical question. The answer is no, it's never happened before. So what has just happened? If we're in 721, what's just happened that's never happened before? Sister Bronwyn? Okay, it's the annihilation of the complete nation of Ephraim. It's not partial or anything, they're just being wiped away. So he's asking the question, has this ever happened before? And the answer is no. So we could go through the chapter, and then we get to verse 15. Alas for the day of the Lord is at hand, and as a destruction from the Almighty shall it come. Brother Stephen, could you paraphrase that for us? 1:15.
God is going to punish us.
You've got to speak a lot louder, so I can't even hear you.
God is going to punish the destruction.
I can't hear it, sorry.
God is going to destruction the Jerusalem.
God is going to
destruction of God's people for not obedience.
Where do you see Jerusalem in there?
My mind was just on to the destruction of Jerusalem was God is going to punish.
Okay,
Jerusalem.
so when I ask to paraphrase, if we just try and stick to what the verse says, often we're right, but sometimes we're not. When we add either foreknowledge or our preconceived ideas, if we just stick to what the verse says, you're correct. But then if you're going to say the no, I'd ask you demonstrate that it's Jerusalem if you did that, because you can't demonstrate it from that one verse in and of itself. Past, present or future? Sister Rachel?
Present.
Present. Brother Graham? Past, present or future?
Present.
Present. Sister Tess?
Future.
Brother James?
Future.
Brother Gregory?
In the day in which it will happen, it shall happen, so future.
Future. Sister Rachel?
Yeah, I see that future.
Future. Brother Graham?
Yes.
Yeah. This phrase, is at hand, is a tricky phrase. Where is, I was going to say, where is it trickiest? Maybe that is correct. I'll say it that way. Where is it trickiest? Brother James?
Well, if you look at it as a day, as a period of time.
Oh, what verse? What usage? You'll explain in a minute for us what it means. Where would we go where it's used and it causes people no end of problems?
You mean another verse?
Yeah. Brother Nathan, what's our topic?
At hand.
Overall, the overarching theme, which we haven't even started doing yet.
It's at hand. What does it mean that it's at hand?
I can't hear you, sorry.
What does it mean that it's at hand?
Oh, no, I meant for this semester. Maybe you missed that class. Brother Daniel? What's the theme of this semester to begin with, at least? We may move on to a different subject. What subject are we looking at?
Okay, the second coming.
First angel's message. Which Bible verse, Brother James?
First angel's message, Revelation 14:6.
6? You sure it's 6?
I'm pretty sure it's the start of it.
Yeah, but we're not looking at the start. What we're looking at? The phrase?
At hand.
Okay. So, verse 7, it's not going to use the word at hand here, but it's going to use a slightly different related phrase, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment is come. So is come, is at hand, synonymous terms, and it causes people problems about how we're going to deal with that phrase, what it means. So this is why people have picked up Joel 1:15 and said it was present tense. I think that's why they were picking that up, because it says is at hand, which means normally it's here. Explain.
So I was saying if the day is at hand, if it's a period of time, it's the beginning of it. So the rest of it being full would be like sometime in the coming day. The beginning of the period is here, but it's not fully here yet. It's not complete.
Okay, so Brother Stephen said this is the destruction of Jerusalem. Do you agree with that?
I don't know.
Okay, but it's a destruction. Okay, you saying it's already begun.
The period that it happens in has begun, not necessarily the destruction has begun, is what I was saying.
The period of what? Because you can't say the period of it and say that it is not the destruction. But this is the day of destruction, is it not? You can't have it both ways. Or can you? The day of the Lord, and it says as a destruction. I don't know what that is. Isn't it that day is the destruction? Is that not what it's referring to? So if you're going to make it a period of time,
right,
you're saying you're in the destruction already.
Or it has started.
So the destruction's already started. Has it already started in verse 15?
I don't know, because I don't know what the destruction is.
The end says, shall it come?
Sorry?
The end of the verse says, shall it come?
And as a destruction from the Almighty shall it come. So Brother James wanted to say a day is a period of time, hence we're already in it, but its complete fulfillment will be in the future. I think that was your logic, yes? So if that's your logic, how would you identify that it's already started?
Because it says is at hand.
But not from the logic of the verse, the logic of the structure that we've got. If we're in 721, what's just happened?
Destruction has started.
So the destruction, if you're going to use that logic, right, if you're correct to use that, I'm not saying it's,
right,
it is, but if you were going to use that, you'd be saying that this is the day. It's already started here, and it's about to come to its completion here. If you're going to make that argument, which I think is probably a valid argument. It's talking about something in the future. And what's in the future? This is chapter 2. If you have little subtitles in your Bible, some of them do, it's called what? The Day of the Lord. So, this Day of the Lord is the destruction of Jerusalem. If you ran through these verses up to verse 11, it's the destruction of Jerusalem. I don't think it's. I think it may say Jerusalem. I can't remember, but it's talking about the cities are going to be destroyed, and this is going to be done by the Babylonians. So, if we were going to make the argument that the day has begun, the destruction already began here in 723, and it's going to end, or Hoshea, it's going to end with Zedekiah. If you're going to make that argument, you could introduce another Bible passage, a famous Bible passage. What would that be? Jeremiah, from the book of Jeremiah. If you're going to mark the beginning and the end. Sister Alyssa?
I want to say 31.
You don't want to say 31.
Okay.
Brother Graham? Sister Tess?
We're looking at Jehoiakim.
Chapter 50? Someone will give the verse? Again, we can apply this verse at two levels, but I'm applying it in this context. Verse 17. Israel is a scattered sheep, the lions have driven him away. First the king of Assyria has devoured him, and last, this Nebuchadrezzar, king of Babylon, has broken his bones. So if we were going to make this the day, like you wanted to, then it began with the Assyrians, and it ends with the Babylonians. Are we okay with that? Yeah? We could make the beginning Manasseh. That's how we would often do that. That the Assyrians begin the destruction of the southern tribes with the reign of Manasseh, and then it ends with Zedekiah. You can make that application, but this is, I think, is equally valid. Are we okay with Jeremiah 50 verse 17 and how we've applied that? Are we okay with the book of Joel? We only went here because she's comparing 1780 with the book of Joel. She gives the time frame for it, 2,500 years. We're now able to locate this story back to the destruction of Samaria, 723 into 721. The book of Joel says, the destruction that you've just seen, have you ever seen one like that before? The answer is no. And the response, he doesn't quite say it this way, but you're about to see it in a much stronger fashion. It's going to be a lot worse. The completion of that, the destruction of the Lord. The book of Joel gives you the opportunity to repent if you so wish to take it. But if you don't, then the punishment's going to come. And I just want to bring one more point on this one. Let's go back to this story here. Remember this story? The papacy is going to be punished because it was derelict in its duty. We'll put that one aside. What's the classic reason why it gets the deadly wound? Isaiah 10, what was that story? Because it becomes boastful. So we know that once these powers have done their work on God's behalf and they've done the punishment that they're supposed to do, then they receive punishment as well. Are we okay with that sequence? They punish God's people and they get punished themselves. So tomorrow we'll pick up in the book of Joel. Someone reminds me, because I'll probably forget. That will just tidy up that loose end. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness and mercy. We want to ask and pray for a continued blessing upon us as we continue to study your word. We ask, Lord, that these thoughts and ideas that you are giving us would take root in our hearts and our minds, that they may begin to mould and shape and change us into the men and women that you desire us to be. As we consider the 1260 and the many facets that it teaches us, help us to understand the original application so that as we begin to contemplate what they mean to us, we would make correct applications for our own history. We pray for these blessings in Jesus' name. Amen.